order. And our invocation for today is from Jeff Mackey. Jeff, are you with us this morning or today?
No, it's Bill Leck. They switched.
Oh, Bill, are you giving the invocation today?
You're muted, Bill.
Not now. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Let's pray.
Hello. How are you?
God of all, today we pray that we may receive your blessing because we are committed to be a real service organization to help humankind. May each of us in our daily routine come to know the joy of caring and sharing with others who are not as fortunate as we are. May our motto that includes serving, caring, and sharing be for us life service, not just lip service. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
And David, can you bring up the flag for us, please?
Yes, I will take it.
Thank you. And if y'all will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of
United
America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Okay. You still have going on Toys for Tots. To make a contribution, as you've heard, I'm sure, it's been asked you send a check directly to the police department. The address for that was in the email sent to you. If you've misplaced that and you need to know it, just give me or David a call and we'll give you the correct address. If you do make a contribution, please note on the memo that it's for the Rotary Club of Lake Hickory. And as most of you probably have already heard, all the sign-ups for the bell ringing for the 28th and the 5th are full, with the exception of one slot at 8 p.m. on the 28th, Saturday. So if anyone would like to sign up for that, that would be welcome, and that'll give us a complete full house. And of course, we're also still looking for contributions to Polio Plus. As Ernie has said many times, he can't strong arm you because we're not meeting in person, but he's trying to do it telepathically, I guess. And if you can see your way clear to make a contribution to Polio Plus, that would be a very good thing for eradicating polio. Yes, sir.
Lou, we are up to, thanks to some big contributions, we're up to $720, $730 now. So we do need a better percentage of participation from the members, and pretend like I'm strong arming you right now.
Okay, well, certainly that sounds a little bit better than the total you gave us the last week. So
right,
that's encouraging. So I would still like to encourage everyone to please make a contribution if you can arrange to do that. Today is the day that we need to announce the proposed officer lineups for the Rotary year starting on July 1st of 2021. We will follow up this announcement with an email that will be sent to all of the members. And then per Rotary procedures, between now and our annual meeting, which will be on December the 29th, all members will have the opportunity to make another nomination for any of these slots if they so desire. If any of the members do want to make a nomination, they would contact me or David Leonetti with whichever name they have in mind. Now, for the nominations that we have in place now for president, and all of these will start on July 1, 2021, David Leonetti, President-elect First Vice President Ingrid Keller, Second Vice President Nate Auten, Treasurer Doran Swearingen, Secretary will be Alan Barnhart, and he will be assisted by AJ Curley. And then board members, Lindsay Kiesler will serve 3 years starting in 2021, and Ernie Sills will be repeating starting in 2021. So if anyone has any names they would like to add to that, please contact me. Otherwise, we will plan on voting for those positions on our annual meeting, which will be the 29th of December. Now, before we go into the program, are there any other announcements that any member needs to make?
8 o'clock meeting. 8 o'clock slot.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to the program. It is by our fellow Rotarian, John Leach, and it's entitled The Cruise That Didn't Happen. John?
Hi, good afternoon. Well, before we start, I want to acknowledge a couple of guests. Jim Lears, who you've heard me mention before and will hear me mention in this presentation, is joining us. As of course, Fran Farthing, who we were talking to earlier, who's a former member of our club and until she moved to Asheville. So let's try first of all, I'm going to turn off my video camera to improve my bandwidth. Here we go. And then I'm going to try and do the screen sharing. Okay. Now, if I start the presentation.
You can come sit right there if you want.
Okay, now, are you seeing, David, are you seeing the full screen or my preview?
You've got the slideshow up, and it's I think your first slide was a blank one.
Right.
Yep.
Does that look right?
So, yep, now you're on the title.
Okay, well, my talk is called The Cruise That Didn't Happen, or The Dream Trip That Was Almost a Nightmare. This year of COVID-19, I mean, there have been a lot of canceled trips and shattered dreams, and I know a lot of you have probably been disappointed by missing out on events that you'd long planned. As you probably know, most of you know, my wife and I do a lot of traveling, especially on cruising. And I do a Rotary travelogue most years, and I usually take pride in only using photos I've taken myself. But this one's a little different because I've had to borrow a few, and this is the first borrowed picture. So far this year, we've actually had 10 cruises for 2020 and 2021 canceled. Some of them we booked as long as 2 years ago, while others we booked earlier this year, sometimes to replace ones that had been canceled that then got canceled. The canceled cruise, though, I'm going to tell you about now is rather different from the others because we actually made it to the ship before it was canceled. And we almost got stuck in Ecuador into the bargain. So before I really get started, here's a quick commercial for a magazine called International Travel News. It's a magazine written primarily by the readers, the travelers, but it does have articles by people like Rick Steves, who I'm sure many of you know from TV. Presently, they're running a series on trips affected by COVID-19, and it's planned that the story you're about to hear will be in this magazine sometime in the next few months. If you go to their website, you can actually view a couple of editions for free because they've started having to do some just online as well as instead of the paper version because of problems with advertising. But the annual subscription is really only $26, so it's a good magazine if you like traveling. Okay, so anyway, commercial over and back to the story. In fall last year, our friend Jim Lears did a cruise to the Galapagos. Here is one of Jim's pictures, wildlife pictures. He told us how wonderful the wildlife was and urged us to go while we still could. The trip is somewhat physically demanding because it's hiking, snorkeling, kayaking, all that kind of stuff. And the transfers between ships and islands are done by Zodiac and involve dry and wet landings. Now, if you don't know what a Zodiac is, this is a Zodiac. And a wet landing is where you wade ashore. So we went ahead and made plans through our usual travel agent, Fran Farthing, who many of you know. She's been my travel agent for over 40 years. And we plan to go in March of this year, choosing Silversea as our cruise line. This is because our cruise line of choice, which is Crystal Cruises, doesn't go there. Now, the Galapagos Islands, they were made famous, of course, by Darwin because of their unique endemic wildlife. They're a group of 21 volcanic islands located right on the equator in the Pacific Ocean. And they're about 550 miles from the continental Ecuador, and they're part of Ecuador. They're classed as a national park in a marine reserve, so access is closely controlled. There are only a few cruise lines that are permitted to go there, and the ships have to be primarily Ecuadorian owned and crewed. There are 54 land sites that can be visited, and access is controlled to like 2 to 4 hour shifts. And the groups have to be accompanied by licensed guides, and they're being very careful to minimize the impact on the wildlife, particularly of the area. The largest ships can only have 100 passengers, and you visit in small groups, and no 2 large ships are allowed in the same location at the same time, at least normally. So cruises always include 1 night in an Ecuadorian city, and this is a government requirement because they want the extra tourist dollars. So we were supposed to fly into the capital, which is Quito, on Thursday, March 12th. We were going to spend 2 nights there and then fly via Guayaquil, which is 170 miles away, fly through Guayaquil to San Cristobal, which is on the islands. And then there we were going to pick up the ship. It was called the Silver Galapagos. We were going to spend 7 nights on the ship visiting 7 or 8 islands. And then the following Saturday, fly from Baltra on one of the other islands back to Guayaquil. And then from Guayaquil back to the US. Now, flights back to the US are somewhat limited. Miami, there are only 2 flights a day. There's a very early American Airlines flight that boards at 4:30 a.m. And then there's a late evening flight, which leaves at 11 p.m. So our plan was to spend the Saturday night in Guayaquil and then fly out on the Sunday using the late flight, getting us home the next day on the Monday. This, however, wasn't quite what happened. What happened, of course, was COVID-19. Now, this slide shows what was happening in the weeks leading up to the cruise. Now, we knew, of course, that the outbreak was spreading around the world. The first US reported case was from someone who had traveled from China and was reported on January 20th. Now, the first death occurred 5 weeks before we were due to leave. 3 weeks before the trip, there was a spike in Italy. 2 weeks before the cruise, Silverseas told us that they were instituting restrictions on passengers. No one from China, Korea, or parts of Italy were going to be allowed, as well as any staff from those places. But for us, at least, it looked as if the cruise was going to go ahead as planned. 9 days before the cruise, cases in Spain started to spike. But 1 week ahead, there's still only been 175 confirmed cases in the US. 3 days before we left, Italy went into lockdown. And then the day before we left, the World Health Organization declared the outbreak a pandemic. President Trump banned travel from 26 European countries to the US. But on the same day, there'd only been 8 cases in North Carolina and only 19 in Ecuador. There were 31 in Florida, and we were flying through Miami. But we still felt reasonably safe traveling to Quito. We got up early, March the 12th, and headed for Charlotte. Now, you're going to hear this got up early quite a lot. On the 5 days that the trip actually ended up taking, the average time that we got out of bed was 4:30 a.m. And that was local time. In North Carolina, the average was an hour earlier. We flew to Miami using American Airlines. We'd arranged our plan, which is what we usually do, both because with the back problems I have, I need to fly business or first, and also by relying on the cruise line for the transport doesn't always give you the most direct route or our preferred carrier. Now, we fly American and its partners a lot, and so we've achieved executive platinum status for 2020. This is the highest earned frequent flyer classification. The significance of this, or lack thereof, will become obvious later in the talk. So from Miami, we flew to Quito. The first indication this was not to be a normal cruise came when we were greeted in immigration by workers in full hazmat gear. We weren't permitted into the country until they'd taken our temperature and we filled out a medical questionnaire, the first of many.
Not a good sign.
No, it wasn't. We took private transport to the Marriott Hotel, which is a very nice hotel, by the way, and you can get a real good deal there at the moment. We checked in about 11 o'clock. From this hotel until the hotel in Guayaquil, all the transport was part of the cruise package. So this is the morning view from the hotel room. This day we actually had got to sleep in until 6:30 a.m. It was the latest we slept in. This was still pretty early, but we wanted to do some sightseeing. But before we could do that, we had to have breakfast and visit a doctor for another temperature check and another health questionnaire. This one was for the cruise line. Quito's quite a nice city to visit, reasonably typical for South American colonial cities. We took a taxi to the old town and were dropped here with some interesting wall art. Nearby, we found the government buildings and the president's palace. Of course, as you find in pretty much all South American cities, the Independence Square. This was a very elaborately decorated Jesuit church, and the church interiors were nice too. Now, above the old town, there was a large statue looking down on us, and we decided we would walk back to the hotel rather than take a taxi and stop somewhere en route and get some lunch. So we started heading back towards the hotel, but first you see that big church in the distance. It's a basilica, so we stopped there and took a look inside. Heading on further towards the hotel, we found that the graffiti was better than you find in Europe, or perhaps this was authorized graffiti. We stopped by a colorful craft market and then we found a restaurant for lunch. Now, I'm not sure this was an omen, but notice the name of the one we picked. Yes, we picked the Casa Corona. So we had a nice lunch and then back to the hotel for a rest. And then in the evening, there was a tour organized through the cruise. And we went back into town, saw some of the same places that we'd been to before. But we ended up somewhere we hadn't been. It was a chocolate shop cum museum. Ecuador is very proud of its chocolate. Okay, bed next morning, another early start, up at 4 a.m. In time for 4:30 breakfast, and we left at 5:40 by bus to the airport. Now, because of the last minute cancellations, there were only about 60 of the planned 100 cruisers going on the cruise. We had to wait in line to get boarding passes, and normally the cruise line would have got those in advance. The plane we took that you can see here is LATAM Airlines. It was all economy and the seats were rather tight. It wasn't made any easier by the person next to me requiring a seatbelt extension and taking up 25% of my seat. I was in the dreaded middle seat. We had a brief stop in Waikil before continuing on to the islands. We landed in San Cristobal, and then we stood in a long line to get our park passes. Then a bus took us to the pier. At the pier, we had some free time. And this was the one chance, as it turned out, to see some of the famous Galapagos wildlife. I was still using my cell phone for pictures at this time because I didn't get out my good camera till I got to the ship. So here are my Galapagos wildlife pictures. There were some seals and some crabs. There was the iguana and various other assorted creatures. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, that's as close as we got to any birds. By 1 o'clock, it was our turn for a Zodiac. So we headed out for the ship, the Silver Galapagos. For a short briefing on the ship, we headed to our cabin where there was a nice chilled bottle of champagne waiting for us. We had a quick look around. The ship was a little dated. It was due to be replaced this last summer with a brand new ship, but it was quite well kept. Here's a picture of the lounge. We had quite a nice lunch. The cruise was all inclusive, including alcohol, and then we unpacked. Now at 3 o'clock we had a slightly less brief briefing that involved a welcome and a lifeboat drill. And then the ship raised anchor and we set sail. Now, 4:30 came the first intimation that something was maybe wrong, because I went to choose my snorkeling gear at the specified time and there was no staff there. But frankly, at the time I missed the clue. A more positive sign, or maybe that should be a more negative sign, that all was not well, came a few minutes later when I got an email from American Airlines informing me that our flights the next week had been cancelled. Now, this does happen sometimes. And it said we were to choose alternative flights. However, when I tried to choose alternative flights, all I got was nothing available. Check back later. I therefore emailed Fran. She'd heard nothing from the airline, but she did check, and then got back to us a little later with an alternative flight back through Panama City on Copa Airlines. She didn't recommend the one through San Salvador. So we went ahead and we booked this, and it was at 6:25 we did that booking. However, in the meantime, while this was going on, we'd been up on deck for a sail away cocktail party. This was a party while we circumnavigated Hickory. This is a fancy way of saying we sailed around a big rock in the ocean. This is where we saw the real birds, it was quite an impressive rock though, as rocks go. So as we sailed away from the rock, I'm sorry there's so many pictures of the rock, but that's about all I got to take pictures of with my good camera. As we sailed away from the rock, we headed for our usual, at least for cruise, and a pre-dinner cocktail in the piano bar. We were to have a briefing for the next day's activities at 7. So we were enjoying our martinis and chatting to another couple. We were the only ones in the bar at the time, when a rather ominous announcement was made at 6:45, which gave us pause for thought. It said, all passengers were required to attend the briefing where an important announcement related to the cruise would be made. We looked at each other and said, that doesn't sound good. And sure enough, it wasn't. When they finally managed to find everyone and get them seated, we were told that the president of Ecuador had closed the borders due to COVID-19, and therefore the cruise was cancelled. We were told we had to leave the ship early the next morning, and we'd be flown back to Waikil on special flights. They had no other information at that time. It later transpired that the president had made the announcement before 10 a.m. local time, and had Silversea told us of the cancellation just a little earlier, we wouldn't have booked the non-refundable tickets on Copa. We're now looking forward to a weekend in Panama City to use Copa Credit Hub. So I immediately contacted Fran with the information on the cancellation. And as our travel agent, she never actually received official notification from Silversea. She wasn't able to reach Copa to cancel our flights we'd just booked, but I talked to the people at the front desk on the ship and they were able to cancel it, but not in time that we still didn't have to pay for it. They also told us that they were working on getting everyone back to Miami, even those of us who had not got our flights through Silversea. Then I told Fran it looked like we were going to get back to the US and we would confirm it in the morning. So we headed for dinner, went back to the cabin and repacked all our clothes so that we could put out our cases by 11 p.m. and then headed back to the bar for a nightcap. We got some sleep until we were woken by the anchor chain at 3 a.m. We got up early again at 4 a.m. And as it got light, we could see other expedition ships parked near us. I checked with the front desk and they confirmed that a charter flight was arranged that would get us back to Miami. So I sent Fran an email with the good news and we had breakfast. Overnight, we'd sailed to a different island. We'd sailed to Baltra, which is where we'd been scheduled to finish the cruise. So at 5:45, we started heading for shore on Zodiacs. Now this meant we'd spent less than 17 hours on the cruise. It was our shortest cruise ever. In fact, it may have been one of the shortest cruises ever if you don't count the Costa Concordia that ran aground 2.5 hours after sailing. There were a lot of other folks heading ashore. The guides were actually all thrilled to see lots of their fellow guides because normally they didn't get to see them because they stagger the unloading so that everyone isn't there at the same time. So we headed for the airport in a little bus. Now, check-in at the airport was undercover, but with the outside open to the air, so there was no air conditioning. So it was pretty hot and sticky. But there were lots and lots of people, as you can see, far more than they could handle at any one time. So, of course, the computers went down. So after standing for an hour in line with no movement, they started handwriting the boarding passes and luggage tags. This is what one looks like. It's been a long time since I've seen a handwritten boarding pass. Well, eventually, we got to wait in relative comfort. And finally, our plane was ready to board. When we got to Guayaquil, we were taken by bus to the Oro Verde Hotel, which again, a very nice hotel. And again, you can get a real deal on it at the moment. This is the hotel that Silversea uses to provide lunch and a day room for the people who are leaving in the late evening flight, and the one that we'd booked an extra night in for the following week. So finally, there was a Silversea's representative to give us information, as we'd seen no one from Silversea since we left the ship. However, her message wasn't what we wanted to hear. Her message was, for those who'd booked their flights through the cruise line, they would be flown to Miami. The rest of us were on our own. I pointed out to the rep, that's what wasn't we'd been told on the ship, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. The advice to call our airline was the only help we got. Of course, that's what I did next, using my super special hotline for my super special executive platinum status. Unfortunately, the person I spoke to just said, we have no flights for the next 2 months. Actually, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I don't think she wished us luck. At this time, I must admit, I was starting to get a little bit panicky. So I emailed Fran. Now, fortunately, our wonderful travel agent had her computer on and was being monitored, even though it was Sunday morning. Within minutes, she'd also called American, found someone who was competent, and got us seats on the early morning flight to Miami the next day, Monday, followed by a flight back to Charlotte. Our seats were in business class, which is what we'd originally booked, and for no extra charge from our original flights. Well, of course, we breathed a huge sigh of relief. We went to the front desk and they were happy to give us a room for the night a week before we'd actually booked it. We had went to the restaurant, had a nice lunch, which was included as part of the Silversea package, and then set out to see Guayaquil. We got a map from the concierge, and he told us places we could walk and things to see, but he kept pointing out everywhere was closed, including all the parks, although in fact the churches were still open. Sure enough, the parks were all deserted, and that's because they are all gated and the gates were closed. Yeah, notice the chain on the gate. There were quite a few people hanging around in the park, on the fences and around the fences, but generally speaking, traffic was pretty light, and we didn't see as many people as you'd have expected for a major city, even though it was a Sunday. So here was the waterfront park, again deserted, no one in there, and we got to see some quite nice looking buildings. So we went back to the hotel for a rest, and then we got a call from Silversea to say they were actually able to fly us to Miami that evening. Well, since we'd already got paid for business class seats the next morning, we declined their rather late offer. We had an early light meal in the bar because again, we were looking at a very early start. So we went to bed pretty early, and we just got to sleep when Silversea called again to check to make sure we didn't want a seat on that evening's plane, and again we declined. So we got up at 2 a.m. I took a taxi to the airport. We checked in, the immigration, the security, it was very slow. It took almost 2 hours. We just about had time for coffee before we boarded at 4:30. Surprisingly, the flight was not actually full as we flew to Miami. In Miami, we were also surprised there were no COVID checks of any kind. There had been lots and lots of checks in Ecuador. It took us an hour to get our bags for the US Customs, but we'd got plenty of time before our flight to Charlotte. Finally, we did take the flight to Charlotte, and when we saw Charlotte, we were very happy. And before long, we were heading home. We got home at 6 o'clock. We only later discovered how fortunate we'd been that Fran had got us that early morning flight. Later in the day, the mayor of Guayaquil closed the airport by parking vehicles on the runway to stop any incoming planes. He didn't even the empty ones that were meant to get visitors out couldn't get in. In fact, some visitors to the Galapagos got stuck in the country for weeks. So the moral of this is, remember, when it comes to traveling, find a good travel agent and don't leave home without one.
Thank you, John.
So, hey, John.
Any
John?
questions?
Yeah, John, when your first slide, when you were going, I think you were coming into Ecuador, it looked like there were some planes parked right on the beach. Or was that just a, it was like your first slide of, when you look down, it was a plane, a panoramic view of the city.
That was, that panoramic view, that was Miami.
Oh, okay.
That was a flight, as I say, we were flying into Miami. So we flew into Miami. That was a picture of Miami from the air.
Okay.
It's
we're glad to have you home. Wow.
Yeah, that's Miami from the air.
Okay.
Taken through the window of the plane.
But you see those things over there on the right that look like planes, don't they?
That's a plane that is in the air flying in.
Oh.
If it is a plane.
Okay.
It does look like a plane. I think that's just a flight, someone flying out in a small plane below us.
Yeah. Right, okay. Caught my eye.
Well, does anybody have any more questions for John? And John, thank you.
Well, thanks, John. I know what you're talking about because I was flying back from Guatemala probably about the same time, and the airport got closed the next day. So, boy, that was pretty scary.
It really is, yeah. Touch and go. You're thinking, the Panamanian Highway, can you actually drive from here all the way home? But I think there's a break somewhere, so you actually can't.
Amen. Isn't it amazing, though, how none of us 8 or 9 or 10 months ago would have even had the wildest thought that this sort of thing would be going on and we would be subjected to all these concerns.
Right.
But it's here and it's very real, and I'm glad you were able to get out when you did.
And of course, this was March, and there are not that many cases in the US at the time, so I didn't realize obviously how bad it was going to get. Although all you had to do was look at Europe to see that it could get pretty bad.
Yeah.
And who would ever think that you would have the government telling you you cannot get together with your family for Thanksgiving? I mean,
well, they haven't said you can't. They're just strongly advising that it's not really safe.
Right. Well, unless you lived in.
Yeah. Who would have thought that would be a recommendation? Yeah. Exactly. Well, these are unusual times. We've had pandemics in the past, but we didn't have TV and radio and so on and anywhere near the same coverage.
Right. Right.
John, we were playing golf the week before. And do you remember what I said to you before you left? I said, I'll see you in June. You remember that? Almost came true.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that actually, yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, John, thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
That was very interesting, and we're glad it turned out as well as it did, but unfortunately you didn't get much of a cruise that time. But hopefully we'll get back to normal at some point in the not too distant future so that you can resume your cruises and then give us a full report of a 21-day cruise.
Yeah, my son said that this made a great story in a lousy vacation.
Yeah, right. And sometimes a lousy vacation makes a great story.
Right.
In this case, it did.
Have you been on a cruise since?
Right.
No, all our cruises have been cancelled. There have been no cruising since March.
Right, right.
Yeah, it's going to be a while before that even starts back up anyway, isn't it?
Our next book cruise is July of next year, and right now pretty much all cruises are finished through March.
Right.
And as far as I know, no one's really announced for sure that anything's. There have been a few cruises to nowhere done in various parts of the world. One of which didn't go well. They're doing them out of Singapore and some out of Germany, I believe. And that you just get on a ship, sail around for a few days and come back.
Doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun to me.
Well, it depends on your cruise line. On our cruise line, I'd be perfectly happy to spend. We spent as much as 8 or 9 days at sea on our cruise line straight when you cross the Pacific or the Indian Ocean.
Right.
And there's so much to do. It's just fine.
I see. Okay. Well, for next week, our invocation is Josh McKinney, and the program will be the virtual tour of the Rotary International Headquarters by our fellow Rotarian and past president, Bill Lair. In the meantime, if you would, please join me as we recite the four-way test. Of the things we
think, say, is that the truth, and fair to all concerned, will be goodwill, beneficial to all
Concerned.
thank you for joining me in this, and please let me take this opportunity to wish each and every one of you a wonderful, safe, and happy Thanksgiving. It certainly will be different this year, but the main thing we can hope for is it will stay safe and nobody comes down with this terrible disease.
Right.
And with that,
Here.
this meeting.
Question.
Yeah.
We do need to remember that our former Rotarian, Doug Taylor, passed away, and keep his family in your prayers over Thanksgiving.
But I'll give you their
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I am remiss that I didn't mention that before, and probably it would be appropriate at this point in time if we observe a minute of silence for Doug Taylor. As most of you know, he passed away last week. And thank you all for that. So we'll see you next week and have a good program then. And again, happy Thanksgiving to all of you.